Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the CPA webinar. My name is Liam Lawson-Jones, and I'm a Senior Planning Consultant at Gerald Eve and a CPA Next Gen Committee member. This afternoon, I'll be moderating a panel discussion with the City of London Corporation's leading planners and development personnel to give the membership an insight into planning and development in the Square Mile. I'm now going to hand over to Gwyn Richards to give an introduction and brief overview of his team and their work. Gwyn.
Thank you, Liam. Hello, everybody. I think it's good afternoon. It's been an unprecedented, challenging year for, I think, everybody on earth, frankly, but certainly in the planning department, it's been an extremely, almost unprecedented, intense year with major developments. I think back in March time, we dealt with 3 towers in 4 weeks, which is, as I say, totally unprecedented, and also really transformational area-based schemes such as the Museum of London and last week Salisbury Square, which will really transform those kind of areas of the city. And I really would like to thank everybody from the development industry and everybody else who have bear with us through the last year, because we've had to all adjust to a different way of doing things. And it's been a very collaborative and positive engagement with all of the CPA and all the other development parties. But I think it's not just the quantum of development, but it's the exceptional quality of developments that we have, that the committee have resolved to grant over the last year. Some really, really bold schemes and schemes which are fit for purpose for the post-COVID recovery. I'm really looking forward, and if you were to ask me about 12 months ago, we would all be fairly, in a sense, of trepidation, but certainly in the last 2 months, there's a real palpable increase in confidence, optimism and positivity about the city, and that's reflected in our development pipeline. And I think the Bank of England called it the coiled spring of recovery. Well, I think that spring is about to jump up, because there's a really intense development pipeline coming up. So we're very, very positive. There's also wider level of governance changes that might happen in the city. There's a debate at the moment about introducing panels, as a result, planning panels to look at planning applications. That's going through committee. We'll have clarity on that in July, and that's as a result of the Lisbane report. So the key focus for us really is to redefine workplaces, get rid of the term office. I think that's quite a negative term, but really look at workplaces as a place of collaboration, innovation, and so on. And you'll notice the 2 launches to this morning on the Future City and also the London Recharge reports about a hub of innovation and collaboration, and inclusivity is a key element. COVID-19 hasn't just been an economic downturn and an economic traumatic period, but above all, it's been a human tragedy. And I think the social and economic inclusivity is a key driver for the city at the moment. One of the key documents to come out of the last year was the COVID Recovery Commission about levelling up communities, about the disproportionate impact of COVID on economically deprived communities and other groups. So we're very, very keen to make sure that the opportunities that the city offer in terms of skill, training and employment and education is offered up on a wider level to all members of society. And also looking at the evening economy, weekend economy, increasingly important now as the city continues to change post-COVID. And also looking at really innovative solutions to do with our whole transport strategy and other radical approaches on. Culture will be key in the resurgence of the city, and we would want to embed culture in schemes coming forward. And also looking at hyper-flexible retail offers and so on, pop-up street markets and so on. I've always been of the view that planning provides the canvas and people paint it. So having a vibrant, buzzing street environment to enrich people's lives is really important. So what I would like to think, I think my approach to planning in the city makes the city planning a much more proactive process, less reactive to development proposals as they come out. And many of the people on this call would have had those kick-off aspirational meetings where we're able to communicate what we want certain sites to do and the challenges that needs to be addressed in our policies and so on. And above all, we want a more collaborative approach to the development industry to look through and work through solutions rather than just identifying the problem. And there's a breeder planning which is evolving, which is a much more holistic, solutions-based planning officers who will work collaboratively with the development industry to ensure that we can both get to the same place, really. So we're really very positive and optimistic about the future. And in the last year, we've recruited and really talented new staff, and many of them which you'll be talking to at the moment. So we're in a very good place to be able to feed the kind of resurgence of the city that is increasingly looking likely. I'll hand back to you, Liam.
Great, thanks, Gwyn. That's a number of very interesting points that I hope we can go into a bit more detail on later. So now it's time to introduce our panelists for today's webinar. So in addition to Gwyn, we're joined by Bhakti Dipala, Gemma Delves, Kirsten Kane, and Simon McGinn. So we'll go around the table for some introductions. If I can start with you, Bhakti.
Yep, sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bhakti Dipala. So I started working at the city about 8 years ago now. Time goes very quick. Before that, I was at Camden Council, came into the city working and negotiating complex Section 106 agreements. And I was also part of introducing the City of London SIL. And then I moved into development management about 5-6 years ago and have since worked on quite a few major complex schemes, including 10th House in Moorfields, 100 Leadenhall, and more recently the Tulip developments. So that was quite exciting, something completely different and radical. And more recently, I've just been appointed as development liaison manager. So that single point of contact for the development industry to make the whole planning and development process a lot smoother, and help to engage more collaboration and work closely with you to, as Gwyn alluded to sort of ensure that we can be more proactive and avoid problems before they occur.
Great, thanks, Bhakti. Gemma.
Thanks, Liam. Good afternoon. My name's Gemma Dales. I've been working at the city for nearly 10 years now as a planning officer, and over that time I've worked on a wide range of schemes, including offices, hotels and residential development. And I think a particular career highlight for me has been working on the Smithfield Market site. So I worked on the public inquiry back in 2014, and more recently on the Museum of London scheme, which I think will completely transform that area and secure world-class visitor attraction for London. And more recently, as of October of last year, I started in post as the Principal Planning Officer for major projects. So I'm now specialising in dealing with the major high-profile strategic schemes. And as sort of Gwyn and Bhakti have both said, taking a holistic view in the management of those schemes, working with a number of stakeholders and drawing on expertise across the city to deliver the best development that we can.
Great, thank you, Gemma. Kirsten?
Sorry, I had my microphone off.
There's always one.
Yeah, hello, I'm Kirsten Kane. I worked many years as a design and conservation officer in the City of London and also more recently in Hammersmith and Fulham. And I always try to incorporate sustainable design principles into my work. And in my new role, I now have a much better opportunity to do that, which is concentrating on sustainability, sitting within the design team of the development section. So I think that's a really good position to drive forward sustainable design and trying to incorporate radical solution, being really proactive and incorporated early on in the application process. There's a really strong momentum at the moment in terms of sustainability and climate change movement, and also in terms of pandemic recovery. So that will really help me in my role, and in particular seize opportunity to offer high quality built environment that people want to come back to and want to work and learn and live in. So like to work or will work very strongly in partnership with other city departments and external stakeholders and developers, and in order to get the best solutions. And one of the things that struck me in all these years is that lots of building owners, managers and developers want to change their buildings because the workforce say they want to work in kind of cool buildings, and cool buildings are buildings that have roof terraces, are very green, that have collaborative spaces and opportunities to socialize, that are diverse, inclusive and full of character. So that means the buildings don't actually all have to be new. There's a good case for keeping really characterful existing older buildings in combination of both to achieve a really strong new character in the city. So that's what Bhakti's Gemmas and my roles are. We focus very much on delivering sustainable and healthy and sociable places in the city.
Great, thank you, Kirsten. And finally, Simon.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Simon McGinn. I manage a team called the City Property Advisory Team. I should say, first of all, I am a chartered town planner. I had about 12 years experience in the Development Control Division, as it was, at the City Corporation in the 1990s. And I joined the City Property Advisory Team probably, I think it was back in 1999 as a secondment initially, but I never went back to the development team. But the City Property Advisory Team, CPAT, was set up in 1995. It was alongside the newly formed City's Economic Development Office, and it was partly in response to tenants moving to Canary Wharf and the City Corporation realising it didn't really have a way of engaging with our major occupiers and understanding what their needs are. So the CPAT team was formed. I have a joint report to the City Surveyor and to the Director of the Built Environment, covering all elements of property. The focus is on supporting our city businesses through ensuring that we have the optimum built environment. I have a team of 5. We deliver programs in 4 key areas: business engagement, property industry engagement, utility infrastructure, and marketing and promotion. I'll leave it at that.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, everyone. There is a lot to talk about, lots of really interesting points that I hope we can get into a bit more detail on. So I think what's key for all of us is that there are a number of trends that have been accelerated by the pandemic, things that were happening before, structural decline in retail, this push for sustainability, diversifying the places that we all live and work. And so I think one question that I wanted to start off with is about culture and how this sort of fits into developments across the piece. I think Gemma, I might start with you just to talk a bit about your experience on the museum and how sort of culture mile feeds into the city becoming a 7-day-a-week, 24 hours a day economy, and what you're looking for in developments across the piece. And I think, anyone else feel free to chip in on that. Oh, sorry, Gemma, I think you're on mute.
Very smooth, even after all this time. Still gets me. Yes, thank you. Obviously, yeah, culture, we think is obviously a really important part of the resurgence in the city, and obviously the museum was a very important part of signifying that and enhancing the city's cultural offer. Culture, we think, is really important. It creates a diversity and a range of spaces that will attract people from different backgrounds. We want to kind of broaden the city's appeal, and culture is a sort of vehicle of doing that. And the London Recharge report, it wants to increase the appeal of the city, you know, to a 7-day-a-week destination, more visitors on Saturdays and Sundays and evenings, and culture is really a way of doing that. And I think the museum was quite successful in doing that, in terms of it sort of engaged with lots of people to consult and understand what types of events it wants to offer, its opening hours, looking at longer hours so that it can engage more people and have more relevance. And we want sort of development schemes to embody culture in a range of guises, you know, from pop-ups, galleries, museums, artwork. We've got some examples where we've secured cultural offers recently, you know, 22 Bishopsgate with its artwork. On 60 Oldgate High Street, we had a reimagined slum pub. So yeah, I think it's definitely the way that we're going, and we see it as a very important part of schemes going forward in the city.
Great. I think you mentioned sort of outreach and engagement there, and making the city appeal to a broader range of people, you know, in the widest sense. I think, as Gwyn, you mentioned, you've had several towers go to committee, particularly in the last few months. A number of those sort of feature education and outreach options. I was just wondering perhaps if you could tell us a bit more about that.
Oh, absolutely. No, I think there's a number of schemes which, Finsbury Avenue was the most recent, where had a community skills education hub which looked out of the city, looked towards those communities. Many of those communities are economically deprived communities who have been excluded or feel excluded from the city. So I kind of compare it to almost inverting the defensive gates of the city, which were intended to keep people out, to actually opening them up to be portals for those communities to be able to get the skills and education, to feel that the city is relevant to them and the opportunities of the cities is relevant to that. And within a lot of these schemes, we've asked the developer to engage with umbrella organisations which can really spread the net wide, understand from those communities what they want from in education, skills and trainings and culture and education, what kind of curated space that would work for them as well. So it's almost the city looking outwards rather than just looking at its own interest. And I think the COVID Recovery Commission report, both the reports that we've recently published, puts education, young people and skills and training at the very core of this. And you'll see schemes coming forward in the next year or so, which will be embedding those kind of outreach facilities within new developments.
If I could just add to that, it's also the fact that, you know, that education is where the entry point to allow more people into the city, but we're sort of also looking to design building ecosystems which will allow them to prosper, adapt, and within those spaces, so that they can, you know, be able to sort of stay within the city rather than, you know, just sort of have the opportunity to come in and go back out. But we want to create this sort of good thread that they can develop themselves within to the city, because that's sort of, you know, getting more younger people back into the city.
Definitely. Thanks, Bhakti. I'm actually going to come on to you now. I think in your new role, sort of overseeing the development process, being the sort of bridge between the city and the development community on specific sites, I think it'd be useful if you could talk a bit about what you see the sort of benefits of pre-app engagement being, and how that sort of leads to better outcomes down the line.
Sure, absolutely. So I think what we're trying to do, or certainly in my role, I'm sort of that single point of contact where we're entering into a lot more planning performance agreements, and these are more structured. We're trying to sort of front load these pre-applications so that, you know, we're prioritizing key topic areas, we're discussing things early on in the process, getting the right people at the right meetings, so that we can develop solutions for a development site, rather than, you know, going later on through the development process and then coming up with any nasty surprises. So what we're trying to do is be a bit more thorough, clear and transparent, and have these two-way conversations. So, you know, we're looking at how we can work together with the development industry to identify the opportunities and aspirations of a site and discuss those early on at the design stage so that we can embed that within the actual development site, and just maintaining this continuity, pace and momentum and a more holistic approach. So, you know, getting everybody within the corporation involved, rather than it sort of just be working in our silos. So yeah.
Oh, great. I wonder, Simon, if you have anything to sort of add on that point. Obviously, there's a lot of the city have ownership of a number of sites across London. So how do your team work with investors and developers to streamline that process?
Yes, so I mean, just building on the point that Bapti was making first, I think it's fair to say that you know, the role that she's going to be forming will be a bespoke, tailored role, looking to help specific projects through a prescribed timeline. My role has been doing that for 20 odd years, where I have been actively seeking to engage with investors and property developers to understand what they're bringing to the marketplace, to help out where there have been issues historically, to actually engage, be sometimes a middleman between the developer and the planning department where there have been issues which have sort of created blockages, to try and help unblock those issues, and that's been successful. It's, you know, clearly we have a big investment portfolio as well, corporate property and investment property. We have ownership in about, well, just over 20% of the city, interest in over 20% of the city, so that we can do a lot of things as a landlord. And, you know, I do help engage with our surveyors department where there are issues and blockages that occur in terms of whether it's negotiating on leases, whether it's on oversailing, trying to get some commercial agreements in place and encouraging those agreements to happen proactively. So, you know, and most recently we are seeing the big transformational projects. Historically, city surveyors have, with their portfolio, have either had the smaller holdings which they're taking forward themselves, or the bigger holdings like Spitalfields, where they've gone forward in joint ventures, or where they've just got a free exchange of leasehold for a freehold ownership across the site. We'd like to keep a control on sites across the city because that gives us the ability to shape the city going forward. But now we've got these big projects coming forward, the transformational projects that obviously talking about the Museum of London, the Police and Courts building that was approved last week down in Fleet Street, and the relocation of the markets, consolidation into a barking site. All of that will provide opportunities to engage further to deliver those projects, which the City Corporation is funding. But there will be opportunity sites that are being left behind, and clearly, you know, there will be, you know, parties who will be interested in how that can be taken forward. We are controlled in terms of procurement regulations about how we do that, so we can't just have off the record conversations and tie up deals that way anymore. We have to go through the proper procurement channels. But the main thing is that we are there, whether it's our surveyors department, whether it's the Department of Built Environment and CPAT team, engaging all the time with developers, letting them know what's going on in an area, what the opportunities are, understanding what the issues are, and trying to bring back and ensure. When I first joined the CPAT team, there were many silos in the organisation, and one of the reasons for the CPAT team was to break them down. But actually, what's been the most encouraging development over the last 10 years with the Department of the Built Environment is recognising that you know, we're all working together. We all want to achieve the same thing, the optimum built environment. So in some ways, the CPAT role has changed over the years because, you know, there are new initiatives such as the new development liaison manager post, which shows that the City Corporation is open to engage with all our clients and to make sure that we're delivering the optimum environment for business and property developers.
Great, thank you. So I wanted to move on, Kirsten, and ask you about your new role, which I think is a really interesting one that looks to integrate design and sustainability, which is something that isn't as common across other local authorities, rather than it just being about energy and some of the more technical aspects. I wanted to ask, are there any projects you're working on at the moment, more generally rather than site specific? And do you have any sort of general advice to the development community about how they should be thinking about sustainability right at the start?
Yeah, firstly, apologies for the noise going on here. I don't know whether he has, but some work's going on in front of my window, so I'm very sorry. So I'm also working very closely on the developing a new SPD on planning for sustainability in the city, which will be looking at very city-specific issues and conditions, such as really dense urban development, and in terms of how can we save or can we reduce whole life cycle carbon, how can we reduce waste, how can we incorporate more greening in terms of biodiversity and amenity for people, and including more social spaces, public realm and general well-being. So that be an SPD really focusing on city-specific issues, which will help to clarify what we expect developers to do and to incorporate. So I'm also inputting on a major applications toolkit that Bhakti works on, again, to clarify our expectations. And I'm working very closely in partnership with other city departments to support, for example, waste, reduction of waste, or increasing of biodiversity, or looking at using the possibility of using much more materials with a low embodied carbon, for example, timber and high recyclable materials. So I also upskill, or my mission is to upskill colleagues and members and provide various learning opportunities, and in partnership with the private sector as well, because the private sector has all the practical experience that we don't have. So we really need their input on what works, so we can assess applications properly. So, and in terms of what the developers should incorporate or expect, they should really, or we would expect some creative thinking around how can we repurpose building and refurbish and extend rather than replace. So as a first step, we want them to think much more holistically and radically and long term about incorporating sustainability in the city, and also addressing climate change. That's really important, and that leads to another point, that looking at viability really of development, because climate resilience is really important for in the long term for the viability of developments, and also flexibility, adaptability, reducing operational energy demand for the end user of the building. All these things become very important also when we look at the introduction of carbon pricing or carbon taxes, and perhaps there'll be new green finance products available soon that will all help to encourage sustainable design.
Great, thank you. I think we've definitely seen across the piece that there's been an occupier focus on sustainability and well-being, which I think that sort of circles back quite nicely to something that you said earlier, Gwyn, about deleting the word office from our repertoire and focusing on it as workspace. I think just to touch on that a bit more, and we've had a couple of questions from the audience come through. I think there's been a lot of questions generally from everyone about what the future of the office is, whether we need more net square meters of offices, how do we deal with existing workspaces. And I think I kind of want to just pose a couple of thoughts and get some responses from that. So I think one is, do you see the city having more flexibility in terms of supporting alternative commercial uses and residential in the place of some of that office stock, which is perhaps slightly outdated or not fit for purpose in that use anymore? And what do you think the future of the office is going to be in 5 or 10 years? I think maybe if I start with you, Gwyn.
If I answer the second question first, if you were to ask that question spring of last year, I think we've got a lot of doom mongers saying that's the end of people going to work in offices. The reason why I don't like the term offices is they're rather bland. You're an office worker, it's office floor space, it's quite a monochrome. But certainly in the last 2 to 3 months, there's been an absolute increase in confidence that people, they've gone through winter lockdown. A lot of people want to come back and have that physical interaction. So coming back into a workplace where you can actually collaborate and innovate with and socialize with people. And it's also spaces which merge work and fun and life. So there should be places that you really want to come back to. So, I mean, we're hearing stories now about potential scarcity of grade A in 3 years' time. And as you know, from the development pipeline, there's a huge amount of confidence there from developers who are frankly a canny lot. They're delivering schemes, or will be delivering schemes to achieve those demands, and the letting market is also picking up as well. So everything points back to a return of people back to the city. Clearly not as we worked before, but it's not necessarily an issue of quantity of office space. It's about the quality. It's lower densities, and what do those workplaces offer in terms of, Kirsten was mentioning terraces, natural ventilation, celebrating cycling, celebrating active travel. So there were changes that were happening before lockdown, but they've been accelerated. And actually, as I say, I was going back to, we need to come back to a more humane city or gentler city. Those workplaces need to be less battery hen, massive floor plates, to being something much more humane. The first point in terms of alternative uses, and I think I picked up something, question about the FT story about residential. There is scope for residential in the city. We are trying to direct them towards being close to existing residential areas, the Barbican, the Golden Lane, Mansell Street, Petticoat, and so on, because that's where you can create a better residential setting and amenity for those areas. And we are also very aware that we need to protect the commercial floor space of the city from erosion. So there will be opportunities for housing. The national targets for affordable housing, one that we share as well. And there will be opportunities, as we have done in the last 10 years, to deliver more housing. But there certainly doesn't seem to be any evidence of suggesting that there is a cooling of interest in commercial floor space at the moment.
Which I think it's very encouraging, and I think we all recognise there is a definite flight to quality of office space, and it's about making sure that, you know, if we're all splitting our time between work and home, that it's somewhere that's worthwhile travelling into. I wonder, Kirsten, did you have any thoughts on sort of emerging trends about offices with a focus on sort of sustainability and well-being that you're seeing in your role?
Well, as a principle, we don't want to encourage or close out certain design trends or technologies just because things are emerging so quickly and change so quickly. As a principle, but we certainly have some positive trends in the city. For example, the occupiers expecting having those roof terraces, green spaces, lots of green and healthy spaces. They expect natural ventilation, natural daylight. We want to highlight and encourage and celebrate cycling, active travel, for example, bringing staircases back into the center of the building rather than pushing them somewhere towards the back where nobody's using them. So being generally more healthy, looking, you know, after people and their well-being is really important. And then, of course, we have loads of collaborative spaces now, especially at ground level. So to get a much better relationship between the public realm and the building itself, that's a really good trend, and will also encourage diversity and inclusivity and so on. That will also help with the general sustainability of the City of London and bringing people back into the city. So all these are really important factors and positive trends, and just to show that people can come back to the city and feel, you know, they are in a healthy and positive space.
No, exactly. I think one point you raise about being outdoors and having that integration with public realm, I think obviously a key focus of the city in the last couple of years has been delivering open spaces, and that's both within, you know, on the ground in the traditional sense, as well as on top of buildings. So I wonder, Gemma, what are the key challenges really for the city in delivering these open spaces?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I think, yeah, as Kirsten said, you know, and we've acknowledged open spaces are really important for well-being, and I think that's probably even more so in the post-COVID world. And I think probably one of the biggest constraints in the city is that obviously we are very space constrained and it's very high density. So in order to deliver these open spaces, we're very much looking to developers to come up with creative ways to provide that open space and enhance the public realm. And we've seen, you know, the shift towards providing elevated viewing galleries and public open space areas on the tops of buildings that are open to people. And as we've said as well, it's very important that these areas are inclusive and open to all. We've also got examples, for example, I think it was 70 Grace Church Street, whereby you've got a servicing area that's open for people to use during the day as an area of public realm, but then overnight it's used for servicing. So yeah, I think it's very much up to, we're looking for people to come up with those creative ways. And the undershaft building was raised off the ground as well, so that you could provide that area of public realm whilst not compromising on your office floor space as well. And I think another probably constraint that people might have sort of said previously was about security as well, and that actually, you know, you couldn't offer these areas and open them up to all in buildings for security reasons. But actually, you know, we've seen with the Sky Garden and other schemes that we've delivered that actually that is possible. You know, we aren't necessarily accepting that position anymore.
No, definitely. Gwyn, I know this is a particular passion piece of yours, so I wondered if you wanted to say a few words on that.
Oh, sorry, I missed the first part. Were you referring to me?
Yes, yeah.
No, I do feel strongly about this, because I think it is a radical reinterpretation of public realm that we've been negotiating for the last 10 years. But I think it's increasingly important, because when we came out of the first lockdown, for 20 Fenchurch Street Sky Garden, it was an absolute catalyst for the opening up of the cafes and the restaurants, and the insatiable appetite the public have for these areas. And they're all unique views, unique kind of at levels and so on. They're winter gardens, they're roof gardens and so on. And the highlight of my planning career was going up to Fen Court when it just opened, about this time 2 years ago, with my eldest son, and seeing a British Bangladeshi family, about 12 from the toddler to the grandmother, all coming up with their picnic to spend a day in a park on top of an office building in the city. And that's how planning can transform people's interpretation of public realm. And also, views from these areas were always the preserve of the affluent, the corporate boardrooms, the high-end restaurants. To put people on top of those buildings would really change the dynamic of the city and make it feel a socially and economically inclusive place. I think they're going to be more important than ever, especially given the constraints that we have in providing meaningful public realm at ground floor level, because those areas are going to be needed for people to pass because of the increase in population of the city. So I think it's a really welcome dynamic, and it's one I think which will be increasingly important going forward.
No, definitely. I think just touching on the piece about supporting the development community, Simon, I wonder whether obviously over the next few years we have some infrastructure challenges, and that sort of ties in with how public realm delivery can be challenging, particularly with underground infrastructure in the square mile. How do we ensure that, you know, everyone across the piece has good access to broadband and water and all the resilience that needs to be built into development to ensure that the future of the city sort of endures?
That's right. Yes, we obviously have the City of London plan, which has specifies that development should look at all aspects such as, you know, water, electricity, telecommunications, and have appropriate entry points and conduits to allow that to be placed around the building. But looking at the wider picture, the bigger picture, we do engage. I have a strategic infrastructure advisor in my team who spends a lot of time engaging with all those infrastructure providers, the water, gas, telecom, and electricity. Historically, we did an awful amount of work with UKPN on the last business plan, which was an 8-year business plan, to ensure that we had the resilience and capacity to support the needs of the city as it grows, and we inform them about how the city is going to grow. And they've actually delivered a massive program of enhancements to the network, which will provide sufficient power for a new Canary Wharf in the city. So I'm comfortable we're there in terms of the power, and we've also historically supported them at a more local level to ensure that the connections to buildings happen in a timely manner. Issues to do with local substations are talked and resolved. So we've always made sure we've given that support. The biggest issue we've been looking at over the last 5 years is probably the digital infrastructure. We're very well placed in terms of having 10 fibre networks around the city that provide for the needs of the major businesses, but clearly we have a huge number of SMEs in the city who can't afford those lease line connections and are very much reliant on the broadband down the old copper line. We've been engaging with Openreach to ensure that they've delivered super fast cabinets to the city, and most recently putting in infrastructure for fibre to the premises, which is done at no cost, and any premise can connect into them, and that will then deliver the capacity for the retail broadband providers to enhance the level of their broadband from, say, 10 megabits to 100 megabits at affordable levels. So that infrastructure is now available right across the city. I think one of the issues they've had is actually engaging with property owners to allow that infrastructure to be put in place. As I say, it's absolutely free. So we really want to encourage people to take that up. We've certainly done it for all our city-owned office buildings. And the other big piece is the wireless infrastructure, which has a crucial impact on how people enjoy the streets and spaces. We put in place back in 2007 a citywide Wi-Fi network we did with the cloud. That agreement finished in 2017, and we had a new wireless concession partner, a 15-year concession, which allows them to use all our street furniture assets to place the technology required for Wi-Fi, 4G and 5G. We've got a new gigabit Wi-Fi network where if you walk down the streets and spaces around the city, you get speeds of up to 100 megabits a second. Most crucial bit of work we've just been doing is relating to 5G rollout, which is fundamental to allowing more mobile creativity. You can get speeds I've read of up to a gigabyte in New York and certain streets and spaces, and imagine if you do that. With our wireless concession partner, we've actually worked, they've been working with all the mobile network operators to see if they can deliver shared infrastructure to the city that will allow rollout of 5G networks right across the city. They have come up with a solution. We've agreed that they can pilot down Queen Victoria Street, and the pilot relates to them demonstrating to the network operators that it can house their infrastructure. Benefit will be if we have a solution that is shared, we'll have much less requirements for cabinets and poles in the city. If each one did their own thing, we're awash with cabinets and poles. Hopefully we found a solution that will work, and the program is to roll out a 5G network right across the city's streets and spaces comprehensively by the end of 2022. So we will probably be, it'll be a world-leading shared infrastructure network, and we should have, if it all goes to plan, full coverage around the city, which will mean that the workers, visitors, residents can utilise the 5G networks as they're deployed.
Great, thank you, Simon. So I think, just conscious of time, and just a reminder to the audience, we will have some time at the end of the session to field questions, so please do keep sending those through. I wanted to just touch on the sort of immediate challenges. Obviously, Gwyn, you've mentioned there is confidence in the pipeline in the future, but as we all know, there are it takes a number of years for something getting planning permission or being in the planning process to be finished and built out. I kind of wanted to just go around the table and get your views on the short-term challenges that we face and what solutions you want to see from the development community to address those, whether that be meanwhile uses to ensure that we minimize vacant buildings, or retrofitting stuff that's fit for purpose. Maybe Gemma, if I could start with you, what's your sort of immediate challenges that you think the city faces in the short term?
I think that one of the things that we need to start looking at more is providing short stay cycle parking. I think there's going to be a big demand for that once people start returning to the city, and also with this emphasis on providing sort of weekend and evening uses and attractions across the city. So I think we will need developers to start looking at how we provide that short-term cycle parking, and it's something that members have highlighted that is very important to them, and we're actually sort of looking at where that cycle parking could be accommodated, and coming up with sort of the ideas of cycle parking hubs in schemes or in vacant buildings, vacant retail units. So I think that's a big issue for us, that we'll start to feel as being particularly relevant when people start coming back to the city. Yeah,
no, totally agree. As a converted cyclist during lockdown, there is an absence of short stay parking now and again. Kirsten, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, just generally, I think we need developers to look at development more holistically and radical and long term, in terms of trying to incorporate also more innovative measures, perhaps be open to that. And because we're very keen to gather experience and data and find out what works in the city, what doesn't. And so we're very keen to try out different measures, different kind of types of facades and elements of buildings that can all contribute to an overall more sustainable picture in the city. But all the matter is in the spirit of what the GLA is trying in terms of circular economy and whole life cycle carbon, just to gather experience, find out what works, and how development can push as much as possible towards really low carbon, net zero, and very holistic solutions. And that's what we try to support.
Great. Simon, I wonder if there's any sort of, are you seeing any market challenges in the short term that you could maybe elaborate on?
Well, I think as Gwyn alluded to, there is a supply shortage coming down the line, and there's certainly already substantial amounts of the product coming forward is already pre-let. So I suspect a lot of the issues coming forward is sort of getting up and running as quickly as possible to ensure that they've got the right amount of product coming forward. Absolutely convinced businesses who have leases that will expire will be looking to move into new premises that can actually have the most collaborative and compelling workplace for workers to come. So I think there will be a swift take-up of any space coming to the market through long-term redevelopment. So the other challenges then for those people who've got opportunities where businesses are moving out into these new spaces, see what they can do with those buildings, whether it's add a floor, 2 floors, turn it around, do a fantastic retrofit, upgreen it, make it have the highest sustainability standards, BREEAM rating. So there is a real, and I'm talking to a lot of developers who are looking at those opportunities that will be already going through the planning system. And then I think the real issue probably is what's left behind, and how does that fit in? Part of me feels actually it brings with it opportunities. There will be a period of years where there will be vacant units, but that will bring forward more affordable workspace for our SMEs. There will be opportunities where businesses are actually having a space for short term which is rent free, just paying the rates. And I've always seen that in the past as whilst it's quite painful for the landlord, it does bring an opportunity for the city to actually have an offer in the market that provides these new businesses to move through and get an anchor in the city, establish where they want to be, and then move on. So, you know, there's going to be some pain, but actually every recession I've seen, the city comes back much stronger. The product is much better, and there may be a few years where there's a bit of a pause, but then it will just take off again at all levels.
Great, thank you. And back to you. Did you have any thoughts?
I think more recent, I mean, Gemma and Kirsten have covered quite a lot of sort of the key issues, but also I think outdoor networking hubs, I think as we start going back into the city, it's creating environments, you know, where we spoke about sort of three-dimensional public realm, but making, you know, those outdoor networking hubs so that we can foster more engagement, and I think also, just, you know, as Simon alluded to, it'd be good to the incubator spaces and, you know, running the thread through the building from entry level point to more permanent sort of a long-term occupation of offices, and just a way of marketing, you know, some vacant spaces, being more you know, radical about how we can sort of make more use of these even ground floor spaces, you know, make them short-term cycle space parking, or, you know, there's plenty of different ideas, but yeah.
No, great. Gwyn, anything to add?
I mean, the only thing I would say is understanding where retail is going, because the days of open Monday to Friday chain store, and I won't name it, but those days are gone, and they won't. And so we're looking at peak days within a weekday, but then the afternoon, the evenings, and the weekends will be key. So I think it's hyper flexibility, and I'd love to have something like a hawker centre for Singapore street food, an ever-changing offer, bakers with celebrating kind of street food and things like that. That just gives you that bit of street theatre, because I think that's where the retail is going to go. We got rid of an anchor store at 70 Gracechurch Street in the Commission, which would be unheard of 10 years ago. But to create this kind of rich, vibrant ecosystem of retail, I think just really understanding that and almost getting the planning system to liberate retail to inhabit these areas, and also on street markets on our streets as well. I think that's the immediate challenge.
Definitely. I think it's quite key from this conversation that we've had that collaboration and flexibility are two sort of key themes that transcend all parts of your team, which is really encouraging for the development community to hear. I think the opportunity, particularly on some of the stuff that you were talking about, Kirsten, with sustainability, I think it's really, I think we all recognize that none of us know what the answer is right now, and we're all still very much learning, and it's welcomed that there is flexibility in how we all achieve these goals that everyone is happy to set. I think flexibility in terms of how we see the office is something also that's really encouraging, and I think it was really helpful to have a bit more insight into how the corporation imagines culture feeding into all developments across the square mile. So I think we've got a couple of questions from the audience that I just wanted to raise. So someone's asked a question about use class E, and obviously that has a number of important impacts across the country following the government's alteration to the use classes order last year. So this question has specifically asked about what this means for existing office buildings where there's no protection, and equally for retail, what sort of impact that would have. I don't know, Gemma or Gwyn, if you wanted to pick up on that. I think what would be interesting to understand is how, you know, even though I guess technically there is flexibility for office users to be lost to other commercial business and service users, whether or not I think there's a market demand for that. I don't know, did you have any thoughts on that?
I think it's better off, of course, we're very much alive. I think at the moment we are adding conditions on a quantum of retail or office and so on to maintain a degree, but to really open up a debate. It's not meant to be fixed. And again, going back to your point about flexibility, that to make sure that we don't end up with barren deserts of ground frontage, of office ground frontage. Who wants to come back to a city where we go back to the early 80s, where every single building had tinted glass and no activity? So we need to make sure that we can discipline the debate, but that's not to say that we aren't open to flexibility. But at the moment, we are using conditions on new schemes to ensure that there is a kind of a benchmark of retail provided in office.
Sure. Kirsten, I have one question for you, and I don't know if you're allowed to answer it, but somebody's asked if you could provide an indication on when we can all expect to see a copy of your sustainability SPD.
Yeah, that's not quite certain yet, but we were hoping to have a draft by the end of this year. But as you heard, there's so many big application going through the system that demand a lot of work. But hopefully they're very useful to learn as to what we expect, what our expectations would be to go into the SPD. So, but hopefully by the end of the year, we are a lot further.
Great. Similarly, someone's asked another question about the major application toolkit. Back to you. Are you allowed to give anything away?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think what we want to do, hopefully can get something out to you sort of later on in the year, sort of autumn time. But I think it's also, it's a sort of a two-way conversation. So in my new role, I'll be meeting a lot of you face-to-face and hopefully soon. And I think it's just an ongoing dialogue that I want to continue to have with the development industry, but I hope to sort of get something out towards the end of the year, autumn time.
Great. Okay, well, I'm just conscious of time. Unless anyone has any final thoughts, I would very much like to thank everyone for your time this afternoon. I think it's been really helpful to get to know you a bit more and what your team's doing and some of the good work that's going on in the city. I'm sort of involved in it in my job, but I think it's been really helpful for the membership to understand a bit more about what's going on in the planning and development team within the city. So
yeah, just one thing I would like to say, I hope everybody out there shares the positivity and optimism that we certainly feel at the moment, especially in the last months. I think that's one message I really would like to convey, that I think we're going to come out of this in a better place than where we went into this, a better city.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think all of us have never been busier than the last year, which is remarkable considering everything that's happened. So I think the key message for me from this session is I think we need to keep engaging, keep talking, sharing ideas, best practice, and I think that can only be a benefit for us all. So once again, thank you to Simon, Kirsten, Gwyn, Gemma and Bhakti for your time this afternoon. And anyone that would like to view this, well, obviously everyone that's watching this is watching this, but there will be a copy made available on the CPA newsletter, which we can share with everyone, and conscious everyone probably has a 1 o'clock meeting to get to. So I think we can wrap it up there.
Thank you, Liam.